I am beginning the recording again, and it's my great pleasure to introduce it's kind of we've been traveling around the world if you've been with us all day. Now we're going over to Cameroon and for half an hour, then we'll slip down into South Africa for the half hour after that. And our next speaker, who is talking about navigating learning through WhatsApp during lockdown, is Abigail. I'm really interested about this talk because I've seen the slides already, and it's like a little teaser about how she's been using WhatsApp and the broadcast function of WhatsApp throughout the lockdown. If you haven't seen the program, then Abigail has worked as an English language teacher at secondary level in Cameroon for 13 years. She is one of the moderators of the Cameroon English Language and Literature Teachers Association WhatsApp group, where she's run a series of teacher development workshops around the theme of teaching English through mobile technology. She's interested in e-learning and working with learners with limited resources, and she's there in the window for us now. So over to Abigail, and I hope you enjoy your talk. Abigail, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. I hope my audio is good enough for everyone. Thank you very much for the very brief presentation. I'll be talking about navigating language learning through WhatsApp during the lockdown in Cameroon. Let's go straight away to talk about my teaching context. I teach in a semi-rural area in Yaoundé, Cameroon. Yaoundé is the capital city of Cameroon. Cameroon is found in Central Africa, and it's a bilingual country. That's we've got French and English as official languages. So I do teach English as a foreign language to Francophone students. This, or last academic year rather, I taught, I had a slight mistake with my slide. So last academic year, I taught 5 classes, 4 of which were examination classes. I had 2 level 4 secondaries and 2 level 6 secondaries. The age range of my students vary between 9 and 24 years, and the enrollment per class varies between 60 students to 135 of them. Last March 18, schools were locked down because of the pandemic, COVID-19, and the Cameroon government had a good approach to learning. They organized live lessons on radio and on television for purposely students who were sitting in for end of year official exams. So we constantly had a series of live lessons on TV and on television. Those of the students who missed the live lessons could have a rebroadcast on social media, be it Facebook or Twitter. And of course, this did not concern students who were in intermediary classes because they were collectively promoted, taking into consideration their first and second term work. Now, in as much as the live lesson was, or the live lessons rather were good initiatives, I had a worry as a teacher and as someone who knew my students particularly, that the lessons were too general, and we had a problem of follow-up. There was no way a teacher on TV or on radio could practically follow all the students, particularly all over Cameroon, and that was frustrating. So I thought, knowing my students' level and knowing that they could not manage live lessons only and get set for exams, I started thinking about other methods that I could use to come into contact with these students and follow them up, particularly so they be ready for exams. And that's how the notion of virtual learning came into my mind, and I decided to give it a try. However, I was motivated, and to me, it was a pilot idea. I had so many questions in my mind. For instance, how do I get into contact with my students? Because in my community, it's a taboo for, I would say, for teachers to have contacts out of school with students. And I was like, how would I manage this out? And how do I introduce this virtual learning to learners who seemed happy to be away from school because they had other profitable activities to keep them busy? I practically teach, or most of my students are married men and women, and they are engaged in so many activities like hunting, farming, trading, and fishing to keep the family going, to be even able to pay their fee. They work a lot. So the lockdown was an opportunity for these students to get into profitable business. So how was I going to bring them along with me talking about virtual learning or something they really knew very little about? And next, what if I was even able to convince my learners which of the platforms was suitable for them? I thought as much in case I had my learners to work with. And was I, as a teacher, ready for virtual teaching? It was the first time I was trying to do something like that. And I was also skeptical about the whole idea. Um, I was bent on it, and I was very sure I could do something for my learners. So I went on um, with the idea. I started by having permission from my administration, because if I had to contact my students out of school, I needed some official permission. So when I explained the idea to my school head, he was very positive about the idea, and and he offered to help. So thanks to the school register that we had, I could have some contacts of my students' parents. And when we called the parents together with my school head, so many of the parents were skeptical. Some complained about financial issues, others said they didn't have time for that, and others were reticent. But a few percentage of these parents were happy and wanted to give it a try because they had their students or their children's success at heart, just like I did. And that's how I got to have my students contact, thanks to their parents. And when I could have one, two, three, or five contacts, it was very easy to have contacts of other students, because students do communicate between amongst themselves. Um, and now I was very, very familiar with WhatsApp, because I use WhatsApp very broadly for so many activities. And I discovered that it had a great potential that could help me in this virtual learning adventure with my students. So once I had my students' contact registered in my phone, I decided to create a WhatsApp chat group. Since I had four examination classes, like I explained earlier, I had to create four WhatsApp chat groups separately, because the level fours do vary in specialization. Some are specialized in Spanish, some are specialized in German as a foreign language too, in addition to English. So each class had a chat group. Same with the level six. There were science-oriented level six and literature-oriented level six. So in all, I had four WhatsApp chat groups for the four uh, of examination classes that I had. Now, I had to manage them, because when I created a group and I started adding contacts, they thought it was a recreation a group. So there was rowdiness, there was noise. They were happy to see each other, though I could understand. But I had to talk to my students, and I had to explain to them why I had to create the group, and all of them could see with me that it was necessary that we get to work if we needed a good percentage by the end of the year. So after some sort of memorandum, I would say, with my students, we started working. I started posting activities on the WhatsApp chat group, and I started receiving responses. But I later on noticed that the responses were very limited to very smart students. The lazy and the weak students shied away from activities. The lazy students would either copy answers from already posted by smarter students and repost it to me as their own contribution, and that was very frustrating. And the lazy ones or the weaker ones would not talk at all. So I thought that there was something I had to do to get to these students, that's the weaker and the lazier, particularly, so that they don't lose in the initiative. And that's how I remember that I had once to use WhatsApp broadcast, and that WhatsApp broadcast would just be perfect for such students. So I decided to create WhatsApp broadcasts. Now, WhatsApp broadcast is a type of group, but what's different with broadcast is that you, the administrator of the broadcast, you add members into the broadcast, but those members do not know that they are members of a particular group. So when you post activities on the broadcast, you send to everybody at once, but feedback comes to you individually. And that was wonderful, because that's exactly what I needed to follow the students that were not very smart in the chat group objectively. So when I created the WhatsApp broadcast, I also had to create 4 separate broadcasts for the 4 examination classes as well. So each class had a chat group and a broadcast. And now once I had created both, I had to divide the activities, which of the activities were suitable in the chat and which of the activities were suitable in the broadcast. The slide in the middle is just to show us how to create a new group. I think everybody can do that, and how to create a new broadcast. So you simply create it as a broadcast as you create a group. The difference that those who are in the broadcast do not know that they are there. So when you post an activity for students to work in the field, you give them a particular job to do, and I think there's much more seriousness. So I needed to separate the various activities, which activities were suitable for the chat group and which of the activities were as well suitable for broadcast. Given the fact that writing activity is production from an individual, I thought as much that the broadcast was the best place for writing activities. And as you can see from the slides, the first 2 images were for the level 4s of secondary. I could ask them, for instance, in the broadcast, to use the images maybe to tell a story or to describe certain activities, and that was it. Once I sent the message, or the images rather, it went to everybody at once, but individually. They received the images individually and they gave me their feedbacks individually as well. So I could work with every student depending on what I noticed was his or her weakness. And the last 2 images were for the level 6. When it came to some more complicated write-ups, we could talk about global issues. They gave me so many responses or write-ups. Some talked about slavery, some talked about forceful marriage, some talked about racism, some talked about studying abroad, some talked about technology. They had so many ideas. So depending on the individual feedbacks that I received, I could tell which was the weakness of which student, and I could as well help them. So writing activities were best suitable in the broadcast. Now, grammar and vocabulary activities, I thought that as much were very good for the group chat. Why? Because I noticed that the answers, depending on the questions that I asked when we were doing grammar and vocabulary, could stimulate the weaker or the lazier learners to talk to. And the other very fascinating thing I discovered was that I could use the emojis that I had in my chat box to do lessons. For instance, I could choose a series of emojis and ask my students to give me verbs. For instance, to put them in a progressive form, we could talk about how to create or how and when to use the present continuous tense, for instance, for a grammar lesson. And I could also use the emojis to talk about adjectives. I mean, there were so many grammar lessons that we could formulate using those emojis. We could talk about adjectives, like I just said. I could talk about sadness, happy, angry, depending on how I wanted to plan my lesson. I could use my emojis to make a grammar lesson. And talking about vocabulary as well, we also had the vast range of these emojis that could help us to do vocabulary lessons. We learned about parts of the body, means of communication. We also learned about types of transportation, endangered species, wild animals and domestic animals, and so on and so forth. There were so many lessons that we could derive from these WhatsApp emojis. So grammar and vocabulary activities were meant for, were suitable for the group chat. And that's how I went. Now, after talking about writing, after talking about vocabulary and grammar, I had to assess my learners. And this was a very tedious part of my assessment. How would I assess? Most of the time, I would formulate my questions depending on what I taught, but also I could also make screenshots of some particular activities that I found in Google or Play Store, and I would simply ask them to send the answers to me. And all the assessments were done on broadcast because, like I said, I needed individual feedback from the students. Now, that's how I managed to use WhatsApp with my learners during the lockdown. And I tried as much as I could to upgrade their English before they could sit in for official exams. I would not, of course, claim that it was a perfect experience. I had so many setbacks, and some of them were network. I had problems with network. Not all the students were online at the same time, and the students had to give their feedbacks just when they connected, and I would always come back to old stories all the time, and that I understood because not only they were active as citizens, but they were also students, and then connection wasn't easy at all to have as a student. And another setback that I had was I had I always had the problem of space with my phone. I would always run out of space, and I would always delete messages to be able, because the activities were so many, the answers, the responses, the chats. So I always run out of space. After every lesson, I'll clear the chat box and the broadcast to be able to have a free phone for the next lesson. And not only that, I had 4 broadcasts and I had 4 chat groups and I had individual students to follow. It was tedious, but I was so passionate about the idea that I got through it till
I think her internet has frozen. We were slightly worried it might happen. Just give us a moment. We'll see if we can fix it. Abigail, can you hear me?
Experience, and I can bet you it's.
There we go. It was. Let's see if we can get her back.
She's
Just
there.
bear with us.
Abigail's there.
That during assessments, I decided to assess my students using WhatsApp broadcast because, like I said, with WhatsApp broadcast, the feedback is individual, and so I could mark their exercises individually. Now, how did I assess? I could formulate my own sentences depending on what I taught and post them on the broadcast, and each of them could give me their feedback depending on the questions that I wanted. Or I could simply have a screenshot of an exercise that I downloaded either from Google or Play Store in any of the apps, and send it to them and ask them to give me simply the answers. And depending on their feedback, I would correct each student individually. And like I was saying, that's how I managed to carry my students through the lockdown with the follow-up that I could with them using WhatsApp chat and broadcast. And I was also saying that I can't claim it was 100% perfect activity. I had so many setbacks, one of which was network. We just experienced an example. And most of the time, all the students were not online at one point. So we'd always come back to old stuff to be able to help those who connected late. And not only that, I would constantly run out of space because my phone would always cry to me that there is no space, and I had to delete all the lessons after all the chats after a particular lesson, because there were so many participations, so many chats, and my phone was just going crazy. And then I had so many groups to manage. I mean, I was growing nuts because I had 4 broadcasts and I had 4 WhatsApp chats, and I had to attend to the chat groups, and I as well had to post activities in the broadcast, but I also had to correct my students' individual work when they send their response. So it was not easy at all, but I could manage this wonderful experience through to the end, and my students could sit for their official exam at the end of the year. And that was a fantastic experience for me because I grew very close to my learners, and they were so happy about the initiative, about how simple I could use WhatsApp to help them in English in what they thought was a more complicated task. And so many of them are ready to start the experience all over again this coming school year. Thank you, Sean. That was all I could have. I hope I'm not gone again.
You're still with us. We have got some questions though.
Oh,
if you would like to have if you'd like me to give you the questions.
Okay.
So one of the questions that I have for you is how would this broadcast, this WhatsApp broadcast, work with large classes? So Fatoumata is talking about 60 to 8 students. Would broadcast help in such a situation?
Yeah. Broadcast will function same as a chat group, because you can go as much as 250 of them, 250 contacts in a broadcast. It's just like in the groups, you can go up to 250 participants in a group. But now, how would you do the following up? It's pretty difficult to follow 250 students in a particular class. I don't know if that's possible, but yes, you can have as much as 250 students in broadcast.
So from a theoretical sense, yes, you can have that many, but it would be practically impossible to
manage them individually. Yeah.
You showed us some exercises that you did, but what about listening and speaking exercises? Could they be managed through this as well?
I must admit that that was an exercise that I did not try much, just because I wasn't very experienced on the virtual learning, speaking and listening. But I think it's possible. And I was doing a marathon virtual class because I was caught with time and I had so much to cover up with my students. So it was not time for me to experience speaking and listening, especially because they are not tested on that in the official exams. So I think this coming school year, that's going to be another field of experience using listening and speaking as an activity. And of course, I think there are going to be chat group activities as well. But if you feel like doing it in the broadcast, why not? It's the same thing. With the broadcast, when you post an activity, it goes to everybody at once, and feedback is individual. So no matter the activity you send through a broadcast, you have feedback individually as well. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you did. You covered this a little bit at the beginning of your talk, but Laurie Frey asks, did you get much, or many parents, much resistance from this, and people saying, look, we just don't have the money to have a phone for this?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It was funny because virtual learning is, I'm not in a rural area, in an urban area at all. I'm practically in a rural area, and it's funny to tell a parent who's coming back from farm, for instance, or from hunting, that you need his phone to do some virtual learning on WhatsApp with his students, and he's going to put credits and for internet connection when he's got something better to do with the money. So that was uh, the resistance that we had from most parents. They complained about finances and lack of time for those who resisted.
And did you overcome it? Did you manage to persuade them all?
Like I said, when we tried to convince the parents as much as we could, and we could only work with those who were ready to. We could not force the other parents who were not convinced at all, or who were not familiar with the initiative. So there was nothing we could do when a parent was not okay with it, and we just let it go.
There you go. So last question, and again, you touched on this in the talk, but Celestina asks, when you created the groups, did you set rules for the students to be aware of the purpose? And those parents that obviously allowed their children to use their phone, what was their reaction to these rules or to them doing it?
Actually, going towards the parents was much more of an official consentment, because most of those students even had their individual phones. And there were very, very few of them who had to use maybe their elders' phone or their parents' phone. So when we were getting to the parents, it was just for the parents to know that their children are working with their teachers, because it's not a formal context in my area. And yeah, the students, when I created the groups, of course, like I said, when I was introducing the chats and the broadcast, I said at the beginning it was so full of rowdiness because they thought it was a playground, because they had been for some time without seeing their classmates and it was getting rowdy. But I took some time to explain to them the pertinence of why I had to create a group and why we were here. And because they knew me, and because we were familiar during the face-to-face classes, they knew my temperament, they knew when I was serious, everybody came to order.
Thank you. Just one last question then, because it's a follow-up really. Okay. So you said that those parents that if they didn't want to give credit or put the credit onto the phones, then you just had to kind of leave those students out of it. Caroline is asking, therefore, what percentage of the learners were not able to participate?
Talking about percentage, I would go, there were more than 50% of the learners who were not part of the experience. And like I said, it was a pilot initiative, and it was just some sort of testing. So I was ready to work even with one student, provided I tried to see if this is an idea that could work, and it did. Thank God, in Cameroon, after the lockdown, we had a 2-month face-to-face class with strict security measures to be able to prepare the students for their end of year exams. So those of them who were not able to work with me during the online virtual lessons, of course, we covered that during the 2 months of catch up before the exams.
Perfect. Abigail, thank you so much. The time has come towards the end of your talk time now. So I'd like to say thank you so much for agreeing to share this pilot with us and this experiences with us. I'm sure everybody in the audience will agree that it was incredibly useful information for it. And I know that one of the things I like most about these conferences is that we can give platforms to people from around the world to share their experiences, and we've really achieved that with you, Abigail. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm going to have to ask you quite ruthlessly to switch off your microphone and switch off your camera now. Thank you, and stop sharing your screen. So we'll continue with this kind of experience coming from from the Africas. Let me just stop the recording to make it a clean recording.